Officer Thomas Brennan had been with the Portland Police Department for 6 years when he tackled a grieving widower at a cemetery and triggered a chain of events that would destroy his career and cost the city $19.5 million. He was 29 years old, young enough to claim inexperience, but experienced enough to know that grief isn't a crime. But apparently, Brennan was convinced that his instincts about who belongs where were more reliable than the evidence in front of him. One Thursday evening in March at Riverview Cemetery in southwest Portland, Brennan responded to a call about a suspicious person near the graves. The suspicious person was Dr. Chen, a 44-year-old cardiothoracic surgeon kneeling at his wife's grave, with fresh flowers in his hand and tears on his face. What Brennan did next, ignoring Chen's explanation, dismissing his hospital ID, and physically tackling a grieving man to the ground, would become proof of how racial bias transforms mourning into suspicion and turns cemeteries into crime scenes. A black man in his mid-40s, Dr. Chen, was kneeling at his wife's headstone on a quiet Thursday evening. Fresh lilies, her favorite, rested against the marble. His hospital ID badge was clipped to his shirt pocket. No disturbance, no violation, no crime. Just a surgeon visiting the grave of the woman he couldn't save. But Officer Brennan saw him through a lens so warped by assumptions about who belongs in Portland's oldest cemetery that he couldn't recognize grief when it was kneeling right in front of him. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Riverview Cemetery sits on a hillside overlooking the Willamette River in southwest Portland. Established in 1882, it's one of the oldest and most prestigious cemeteries in Oregon, with winding paths through towering Douglas, firs and manicured lawns dotted with monuments to Portland's founding families. The cemetery covers 300 acres, with sections ranging from modest family plots to elaborate mausoleums. It's the kind of place where history and money converge. Senators, business magnates, and old Portland families rest under headstones that cost more than most people's cars. It was 6:15 p.m. on a Thursday in late March. The sun was setting through the evergreens, casting long shadows across the graves. The temperature was dropping into the mid-40s. A light mist hung in the air, typical for Portland in early spring. The cemetery was quiet but not empty. A few other visitors moved slowly along the paths. An elderly woman placing flowers, a young couple walking hand in hand, a man reading a headstone inscription. The gates wouldn't close for another 45 minutes. The kind of early evening where nothing dramatic typically happens, where people come to remember the dead in peace. Chen's wife, Dr. Sarah Chen, was buried in Section 12, a newer area on the western slope with a view of the river. Her grave was marked by a simple gray marble headstone. Sarah Michelle Chen, M.D., 1981-2024. Beloved wife, brilliant physician, forever in our hearts. The grave was 3 months old. The grass hadn't fully grown in yet. Dr. Chen had been a cardiothoracic surgeon at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital for 11 years. 11 years performing open-heart surgeries, valve replacements, and coronary bypasses that saved hundreds of lives. He'd completed over 800 cardiac procedures, maintained a surgical success rate that put him in the top 5% nationally, and trained dozens of residents who'd gone on to prestigious programs across the country. His colleagues called him the surgeon you wanted if your heart was failing. His patients called him the man who gave them more time with their families. Chen had graduated summa cum laude from Johns Hopkins University with a degree in molecular biology, then earned his medical degree from Harvard Medical School, where he'd been selected for the highly competitive cardiothoracic surgery track. He'd completed his residency at Massachusetts General Hospital and his fellowship at the Cleveland Clinic, one of the top cardiac surgery programs in the world. He'd published 23 peer-reviewed articles on minimally invasive cardiac techniques. He'd received the American Heart Association's Young Investigator Award for his research on valve repair procedures. Board certified, highly respected, with a reputation for taking on the cases other surgeons wouldn't touch. At 44 years old, Chen was exactly where he'd worked his entire adult life to be. At the peak of his career, respected by his peers, and trusted with the most complex cardiac cases in Oregon. But 3 months earlier, his world had collapsed in a way his training had never prepared him for. Sarah Chen, his wife of 14 years, had been a pulmonologist at the same hospital. They'd met during his fellowship, married 2 years later, and built a life around their shared passion for medicine. Sarah was 42 when she started experiencing fatigue and shortness of breath, symptoms she initially dismissed as stress from her demanding schedule. By the time she agreed to see a cardiologist, the diagnosis was devastating: advanced dilated cardiomyopathy. Her heart was failing. Marcus Chen, one of the best cardiac surgeons in the Pacific Northwest, couldn't operate on his own wife. Hospital policy prohibited it. Ethics boards forbade it. So he watched from the gallery as a colleague performed the surgery he'd done hundreds of times. And he watched as complications set in: an infection, then rejection of the temporary mechanical support, then organ failure. Sarah died 11 days after surgery. Marcus Chen had spent 11 years saving hearts, but he couldn't save hers. After Sarah's death, Chen took a 2-month leave from the hospital. When he returned, he threw himself into work with an intensity that worried his colleagues. He operated, he taught, he reviewed cases, and every Thursday evening at 6 p.m., he left the hospital and drove directly to Riverview Cemetery. That Thursday, Chen had finished a 5-hour aortic valve replacement at 5:45 p.m. He'd changed out of his scrubs, grabbed the lilies he kept in his office refrigerator, and driven the 15 minutes to the cemetery. He'd arrived at 6:05 p.m., parked in the small lot near Section 12, and walked to Sarah's grave. He wore dark jeans, a button-down shirt, and a fleece jacket with the OHSU logo embroidered on the chest. His hospital ID badge, Marcus Chen, MD, cardiothoracic surgery, was still clipped to his shirt pocket. He carried the flowers in one hand and his phone in the other. He looked like what he was: a professional man visiting his wife's grave after a long day at work. He'd done nothing to attract attention. He'd spoken to no one. He'd violated nothing. But to someone driving past the cemetery, Marcus Chen's presence was a problem, and that person had decided to call the police. Officer Thomas Brennan was 29 years old. He'd been with the Portland Police Department for 6 years, assigned to the Southwest Precinct for the last 4. He was enthusiastic, eager to prove himself, and deeply concerned about what he called maintaining order in the community. His supervisors described him as proactive, but sometimes overly aggressive in situations that required nuance. In 6 years, Brennan had compiled a record that should have raised immediate concerns at every level of supervision. 13 complaints. 13? 9 of them involved allegations of excessive force or racial profiling against black residents in predominantly white neighborhoods. 4 had been sustained, resulting in written reprimands and mandatory de-escalation training. The other 9 had been closed with insufficient evidence despite witness statements and body camera footage that showed questionable judgment. Brennan had a pattern. He responded to vague calls about suspicious persons with an assumption that the caller was right and the suspect was guilty. He treated ambiguous situations as threats. And he had a particular problem with black men in spaces he considered upscale or historic. In 2021, Brennan detained a black jogger in the West Hills for 40 minutes, demanding to know where he lived and why he was running in a wealthy residential area. The jogger was a tech executive who lived 3 blocks away. Complaint sustained, retraining ordered. In 2022, Brennan stopped a black father walking with his daughter in Washington Park, questioning whether the child was really his, and demanding ID. The father was a pediatrician. The daughter was traumatized. Complaint sustained. Written reprimand issued. In 2023, Brennan confronted a black real estate agent showing a historic home in the Alphabet District, accusing him of breaking and entering despite the for sale sign and the agent's clear explanation. The agent filed a formal complaint. Training required. The pattern was clear. The documentation was extensive, but somehow Brennan remained on patrol, responding to calls in neighborhoods where his biases turned routine situations into confrontations. At 6:18 p.m. that Thursday, Brennan received a call from dispatch. A concerned citizen had reported a suspicious person at Riverview Cemetery, someone who didn't look like they belonged, possibly casing the area for theft or vandalism. The caller didn't provide specifics, just that something seemed off. In Brennan's mind, the narrative filled in immediately. Suspicious person, historic cemetery, wealthy neighborhood, probably homeless, probably planning to steal. He didn't consider that people visit cemeteries to mourn. He didn't think about the fact that suspicious is subjective. He just responded. Brennan arrived at the cemetery at 6:22 p.m., pulling his patrol car into the main entrance. He drove slowly along the winding paths, scanning for someone who seemed out of place. His eyes landed on Marcus Chen, kneeling at a grave in Section 12, head bowed, shoulders shaking slightly. In Brennan's mind, that had to be the problem. A black man in Portland's oldest cemetery, where most of the graves belonged to white families who'd built the city generations ago. In Brennan's limited imagination, that couldn't be mourning. It had to be something else. He parked his patrol car on the path and approached. Marcus Chen was kneeling at Sarah's grave when he heard footsteps on the gravel path behind him. He didn't turn immediately. People walked past graves all the time, but the footsteps stopped directly behind him. He looked up and saw a police officer, young, arms crossed, staring down at him with an expression that wasn't concern or compassion. It was suspicion. "Step away from the grave." Chen blinked, confused. "What? This cemetery closes at dusk. You need to leave." Chen glanced at his watch. 6:23 p.m. It's 6:15. The sign at the entrance says the cemetery closes at 7 p.m. Brennan's jaw tightened. "I received a call about someone suspicious acting strangely near the graves. You're trespassing." "Trespassing?" Chen gestured to the headstone. "I'm visiting my wife. This is her grave. Then you won't mind showing me some ID and explaining what you're doing here." Chen's confusion shifted to something colder. Recognition. He'd been a black man in America long enough to know what this was. "I'm Dr. Marcus Chen. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon at OHSU. I just finished surgery at 5:45 p.m. I came directly here to visit my wife. She died 3 months ago." Chen reached for his hospital ID badge clipped to his shirt pocket and held it up. The badge clearly displayed his photo, name, title, and hospital affiliation. Brennan glanced at it briefly. His expression didn't soften. "Sure you are. Anyone can get a fake badge printed. What's your real reason for being here?" This is where bias becomes impenetrable. Officer Brennan had responded to a call about a suspicious person at a cemetery. When he arrived, he saw a black man kneeling at a grave. In his mind, that confirmed the complaint. The hospital ID? Fake. The explanation about a deceased wife? A cover story. The flowers? A prop. Every piece of evidence that contradicted his assumption was filtered through the lens of suspicion he'd already constructed. Chen's voice remained calm, but the edge was unmistakable. "Officer, that is a legitimate hospital credential. You can verify it with one phone call to OHSU. I'm asking you to do that before this goes any further. I don't need to verify anything. You're acting suspiciously. Hands behind your back." "Acting suspiciously?" Chen's voice rose slightly. "I'm kneeling at my wife's grave with flowers. What exactly is suspicious about that?" The cemetery had a few other visitors scattered across the grounds. An elderly woman placing flowers 2 rows over stopped and turned. A couple walking along the path slowed, watching. A man near the parking lot pulled out his phone. "Lower your voice. I'm not going to ask again. Hands behind your back." Chen knew he had a choice. He could assert his rights and risk this escalating to violence, or he could comply, document everything, and deal with the consequences later. He chose the latter. "I'm complying under protest. My name is Dr. Marcus Chen. I'm a surgeon at Oregon Health and Science University. I'm visiting my wife's grave. Everyone nearby, please record this." The elderly woman already had her phone out. The couple stopped walking and started filming. The man near the parking lot angled his camera toward them. Chen stood slowly, his movements deliberate and visible. Brennan grabbed his arm roughly. "Don't touch me like that. I'm complying. There's no need for force." Brennan yanked Chen's arm harder, spinning him around. Chen instinctively pulled back, not to resist, just a natural, Reaction to sudden pain. And that was all Brennan needed. Resisting arrest. Brennan swept Chen's legs, tackling him to the ground. Chen's body hit the grass hard, his shoulder slamming into the edge of Sarah's headstone. He heard something crack. Whether bone or marble, he couldn't tell. Pain shot through his shoulder and ribs. The flowers scattered across the grave. Brennan drove his knee into Chen's back, yanking his arms behind him. The handcuffs snapped on, tight, deliberately tight. Chen gasped, his face pressed into the grass next to his wife's grave. "Stop. I'm not resisting. I'm a doctor. I'm complying." The elderly woman's voice cut through the evening air. "This is wrong. He's not doing anything. He's just visiting a grave. Ma'am, step back. This is police business." Another voice from the couple. "We're recording this." He identified himself. He showed you his ID. Brennan ignored them. He hauled Chen to his feet, still handcuffed, and marched him toward the patrol car. Chen's shoulder screamed in pain. He could feel something warm, blood, trickling down his forehead where his face had hit the ground. "Officer Brennan, you are arresting a cardiothoracic surgeon for visiting his wife's grave. You tackled me without cause. You used excessive force. Everyone here saw it. This will end your career." Brennan opened the back door of his patrol car. "Get in. I want your badge number. I want your supervisor's name. And I want to know who called this in. You'll get all that at the station." Brennan guided Chen into the back seat, closed the door, and got behind the wheel. As he pulled away, Chen looked back at the cemetery. The elderly woman was standing at Sarah's grave, gathering the scattered flowers. The couple was still recording. The man near the parking lot was on his phone, probably calling someone. The story was already spreading. Do you think officers should face termination for using force on non-resisting individuals who've identified themselves? Drop your answer below. The drive to the Southwest Precinct took 18 minutes. Chen spent it cataloging his injuries. Sharp pain in his left shoulder, probably separated or fractured. Throbbing in his ribs, possibly bruised or cracked. Cut on his forehead, bleeding but not severe. He'd testified in malpractice cases before. He knew how to document evidence. And this case was building itself. They arrived at the precinct at 6:47 p.m. Brennan walked Chen inside, still handcuffed, past the front desk where Sergeant Maria Castellanos looked up with immediate concern. "Brennan, what do you have?" "Trespassing at Riverview Cemetery. Suspect was acting suspiciously near graves, refused to leave when ordered, and resisted arrest." Castellanos stood. "Did he resist?" "Pulled away when I attempted to detain him. Had to use necessary force." Chen spoke up, his voice controlled despite the pain. "Sergeant, I am Dr. Marcus Chen, cardiothoracic surgeon at OHSU. I was kneeling at my wife's grave. Officer Brennan tackled me after I showed him my hospital ID and explained I was visiting my deceased wife. I did not resist. I complied verbally and stood up slowly. He tackled me anyway. My shoulder may be fractured. There are multiple witnesses who recorded the entire incident." Castellanos' expression shifted. "You showed him hospital ID." Brennan pulled the ID badge from his pocket and handed it over. Claims he's a doctor. Castellanos examined the badge carefully. The photo, the name, the OHSU logo, the department listing. Everything about it looked legitimate. "Brennan, this looks real. Could be fake." Castellanos picked up the phone. "I'm calling OHSU right now." The hospital operator transferred her to the Department of Cardiothoracic Surgery. The confirmation came back within 2 minutes. Dr. Marcus Chen, attending surgeon, 11 years of service, currently on staff, scheduled for surgery tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Castellanos hung up and turned to Brennan, her voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. "You tackled a cardiac surgeon at his wife's grave after he identified himself and showed you credentials. The manager," the caller said, "I don't care what the caller said. You verify before you use force. That's basic procedure. Take those cuffs off him right now." Brennan unlocked the handcuffs. Chen's wrists showed deep red marks, already bruising. He rotated his left shoulder carefully. The pain was intense. Brennan, stay here. Don't move. Castellanos made another call. Within 8 minutes, Captain Richard Torres arrived. He was a 27-year veteran who'd reviewed dozens of use-of-force complaints, but rarely one this clear-cut. Castellanos briefed him quickly. Torres listened, his expression darkening with each sentence. Then he turned to Chen. Dr. Chen, on behalf of the Portland Police Department, I sincerely apologize. This is inexcusable. We'll arrange immediate medical transport to get that shoulder examined. Chen nodded. I'll need copies of the incident report, the 911 call recording, any body camera footage, and the names of all witnesses Officer Brennan spoke to. I'll also need the name of whoever called this in. You'll have all of it. Torres turned to Brennan. His voice was final. Badge, weapon, and radio. Administrative leave effective immediately. Captain, I was responding to a legitimate call. You tackled a grieving widower at his wife's grave after he identified himself as a physician. Give me your badge. Brennan's hands shook as he removed his badge, unholstered his weapon, and handed over his radio. For the first time, he seemed to understand what he'd done. His face had gone pale. The Union can review the body camera footage. Give me your equipment. Should officers with patterns of excessive force complaints be removed from street duty after 5 complaints instead of 13? Drop your answer. Within 4 hours, the videos had exploded across social media. Multiple angles from the cemetery witnesses. Chen kneeling at his wife's grave. Brennan demanding ID. Chen showing his hospital badge. Brennan tackling him. Chen's face hitting the ground. The flowers scattering. Portland officer tackles surgeon at cemetery. Victim was visiting deceased wife's grave. Cardiac surgeon arrested while mourning at wife's grave. Officer had 13 prior complaints. Doctor tackled at cemetery while grieving. Officer ignored hospital ID. The outrage was immediate and intense. The Oregon Medical Association issued a statement condemning the arrest. The American College of Surgeons called for an investigation. Civil rights organizations demanded accountability. OHSU released a statement supporting Dr. Chen and condemning the treatment of one of their most respected surgeons. Officer Brennan's life imploded within 48 hours. The Portland Police Bureau placed him on paid administrative leave pending a full investigation. Internal Affairs launched a comprehensive review of his 6-year record. The videos were everywhere. The witnesses were credible. The evidence was undeniable. Brennan released a brief statement through his union representative. I responded to a call about a suspicious person and followed protocol. I regret that the situation escalated. The union attempted to defend him, but after reviewing the body camera footage and witness videos, they quietly withdrew active support. Dr. Marcus Chen contacted civil rights attorney Michelle Ramirez 3 days after the incident. Ramirez was a partner at a prominent Portland firm specializing in police misconduct cases. After reviewing the evidence, she agreed to represent Chen immediately. The lawsuit, filed 8 weeks later, named Officer Thomas Brennan, Sergeant Maria Castellanos for supervisory failure, Captain Richard Torres, and the Portland Police Bureau. The claims were extensive and devastating. Unlawful arrest without probable cause, false imprisonment, violation of federal civil rights under 42 U.S.C., Par 1983, racial profiling and discrimination, excessive use of force resulting in injury, assault and battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, failure to train and supervise officers with documented patterns of discriminatory policing, negligent retention of an officer with 13 prior excessive force complaints. The complaint detailed Brennan's complete record, 13 complaints over 6 years, 9 involving allegations of racial profiling or excessive force against black residents, a clear pattern of treating black men in affluent areas as suspicious regardless of context or evidence, all documented, all addressed with training that never changed behavior. The City of Portland's attorneys reviewed the evidence and reached the same conclusion. Indefensible. The videos showed everything. Chen kneeling at his wife's grave. Chen identifying himself clearly. Chen showing his hospital ID. Chen complying verbally. Brennan tackling him anyway. Chen's body hitting the headstone. The injury was visible. The force was excessive. The arrest was without cause. The pattern was undeniable. Medical records confirmed Chen's injuries: separated left shoulder requiring surgery, 3 fractured ribs, concussion, facial laceration requiring 6 stitches. He missed 3 weeks of work, the first time he'd missed scheduled surgeries in 11 years. 2 of his patients had to be rescheduled with other surgeons, delaying critical procedures. The emotional impact was documented by Chen's therapist: severe PTSD, anxiety attacks, inability to visit his wife's grave without panic, nightmares about being tackled and arrested while mourning. The city settled 14 months later. The terms were final and public: $19.5 million paid to Dr. Marcus Chen. Portland Police Bureau required to implement immediate reforms: automatic desk duty for any officer with 5 or more excessive force complaints pending review, mandatory, verification of professional credentials before any arrest, real-time body camera review for all use of force incidents, independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power and termination authority, quarterly pattern analysis of all officer stops and arrests, with automatic investigation triggered by racial disparities, termination of employment for any officer with sustained complaints showing racial profiling patterns. Officer Thomas Brennan was terminated 11 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was final, comprehensive, and devastating. Officer Brennan used excessive force against a non-resisting individual who had identified himself as a physician visiting his deceased wife's grave. Despite being shown legitimate hospital credentials, Officer Brennan proceeded to tackle Dr. Chen, causing significant physical injury. This incident represents the culmination of a 6-year pattern of excessive force and racial profiling, documented in 13 prior complaints. Officer Brennan's repeated failure to modify his conduct despite multiple training interventions demonstrates an inability to serve the community with the impartiality and restraint required of law enforcement. His employment is terminated immediately without appeal. Brennan's name was entered into the National Decertification Index. His law enforcement career ended at 29 years old. The anonymous caller who reported Chen as suspicious was eventually identified through cell phone records: a 67-year-old white woman who lived near the cemetery and, according to her statement, called because she'd never seen that kind of person visiting graves in that section before. She faced no criminal charges, but was named as a co-defendant in the civil lawsuit. Her homeowner's insurance settled separately for an undisclosed amount. Should callers who make racially motivated 911 reports face legal consequences? Let me know what you think. Dr. Marcus Chen testified at Portland City Council. Hearings 6 months after the settlement. The hearing room was packed with community members, physicians, civil rights advocates, and media. His testimony was clear, controlled, and devastating. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon with 11 years of experience at one of the best hospitals in the Pacific Northwest. I've performed over 800 open-heart surgeries. I've saved hundreds of lives. I had my hospital ID clipped to my shirt. I identified myself clearly and calmly. I showed my credentials. He paused, his voice steady, but his hands gripping the podium. I was kneeling at my wife's grave. Dr. Sarah Chen died 3 months before this incident. She was 42 years old. She was a pulmonologist, brilliant, compassionate, dedicated to her patients. She died of heart failure despite everything modern medicine could do. And I couldn't save her. Another pause. The room was silent. Every Thursday evening, I visit her grave. I bring flowers. I tell her about my week, about the surgeries, about the patients we saved. It's the only time I feel close to her anymore. His voice strengthened, carrying an edge. On March 24th, I was tackled to the ground at her grave. My face hit her headstone. I fractured 3 ribs. I separated my shoulder. I required surgery myself. The first time I've been a patient instead of a surgeon in over a decade. And for what? For being black in a cemetery where someone decided I didn't belong. He looked directly at the council members. Officer Brennan had 13 complaints in 6 years. 13. 9 involving allegations of excessive force or racial profiling. That's not bad luck. That's not a few mistakes. That's a pattern. A pattern the Portland Police Bureau documented, noted, addressed with training, and then ignored until it targeted someone with the resources to fight back. He paused again. The city paid $19.5 million. That's significant. That's accountability. But it doesn't undo the fact that I can't visit my wife's grave without having panic, attacks. It doesn't erase the nightmares of being tackled while mourning. It doesn't restore the 3 weeks I missed at the hospital. 3 weeks when my patients needed me, and I couldn't be there because I was recovering from injuries inflicted by an officer who saw a black man and assumed I was a criminal. His voice dropped, quieter but more intense. I had credentials, I had status, I had resources, I had witnesses with cameras, and I was still tackled, arrested, and injured. If this can happen to me, to a surgeon with a hospital ID and a deceased wife buried 3 feet away, what happens to people without my advantages? What happens to grieving families who can't afford attorneys? What happens when there are no witnesses recording? The room remained silent. Several council members looked down at their notes. Others met his eyes directly. The real question isn't what happened to me. The real question is, how many people has this happened to who couldn't fight back? And what are you going to do to make sure it never happens again? Should departments be required to terminate officers after 5 sustained excessive force complaints? Drop your answer below. This wasn't just about one officer tackling a surgeon at a cemetery. This was about a department that documented 13 complaints over 6 years and treated each incident in isolation, never connecting the obvious pattern. This was about a system that lets officers accumulate complaint after complaint while remaining on street patrol, responding to calls in communities where their biases turn routine situations into violence. Officer Brennan's record told the story his supervisors ignored. 13 complaints, 9 involving excessive force or racial profiling, 4 sustained, resulting in written reprimands and mandatory training that clearly never addressed the underlying problem. The other 9 closed with insufficient evidence or not sustained findings despite witness statements and documentation. The pattern was unmistakable. Brennan saw black men in spaces he considered white spaces, wealthy neighborhoods, historic areas, upscale locations, and treated their presence as inherently suspicious. A jogger became a trespasser. A father became a kidnapper. A real estate agent became a burglar. And a surgeon mourning his wife became a criminal. But Portland Police Bureau treated each complaint separately, never asked why the same officer kept generating the same type of complaint, never noticed that every sustained finding involved the same demographic and the same assumption, never removed him from patrol despite documented evidence that he couldn't serve the community without bias. The consequences came eventually. Brennan's career is over. That's justice. The city paid $19.5 million. That's accountability. Dr. Chen's injuries healed, though the emotional trauma persists. That's survival. But money and terminations don't undo the violation of being tackled at your wife's grave. They don't restore the sanctity of grief. They don't erase the message that even professional credentials, even mourning, even death itself aren't enough to protect you from an officer who's decided you don't belong. The real question is, what changes now? Do police departments finally remove officers after 5 excessive force complaints instead of waiting for 13? Do they finally connect the dots when complaint number 3 shows the same pattern as complaints 1 and 2? Do they finally acknowledge that retraining isn't reform when the officer keeps generating complaints? Do we finally recognize that suspicious person calls are often just code for someone doesn't look like they belong here? Do we finally hold callers accountable when their suspicions are based entirely on race? Do we finally teach communities that discomfort isn't danger, and that cemeteries, parks, and public spaces belong to everyone? Because if we don't fix the systems that kept Brennan on patrol, for 6 years despite 9 complaints involving racial profiling, if we don't address the culture that taught an anonymous caller to see a black man at a cemetery and think criminal instead of mourner, then we're just waiting for the next officer, the next surgeon, the next widow or widower, the next viral video of someone being arrested for existing while black. Comment if you believe this should be law. Officers with 5 or more excessive force complaints. involving racial profiling must be immediately removed from street duty pending independent review, and callers who make demonstrably false 911 reports based on racial bias face mandatory civil rights investigation and financial penalties. And if you think these stories need to be told, if you believe accountability starts with awareness and change starts with pressure, then hit that subscribe button. We're not stopping. We're going to keep exposing these patterns. We're going to keep demanding that departments act on complaint. Number 3, instead of waiting for complaint number 13. We're going to keep fighting for the surgeons, the joggers, the fathers, the agents, the ordinary people who deserve to mourn, to work, to exist in public spaces without being criminalized. This isn't just about one officer or one surgeon. It's about all of us and the world we choose to accept. A world where grief is sacred, where credentials matter, where pattern recognition applies to officers, not just suspects, where cemeteries remain places of peace instead of scenes of violence. Dr. Marcus Chen shouldn't have had to fight for the right to visit his wife's grave, but he did fight, and he won. Not just $19.5 million, not just an officer's termination, but a demand that we do better, that we see pattern complaints for what they are, that we protect mourners instead of arresting them. The question is, are we listening?